Look out.
Yeah. Goers, Pedro Mon.
Halleck. Mayor Bloomberg.
Towers. Goers, Pedro Amando, you work at a VIP lounge, you said.
Yes.
I can see who you're caucusing for, but...
Mr. Bernie, yes.
Yes, Mr. Bernie. When did you make that decision?
I always be a Democrat, and I realize the way he's thinking about, our people. Mm-hmm. And actually, I got kids. They have, I want to go to a school. And so I know my position, I can say, I make a good money. But for all the people that don't make no money, it's hard to send our kids, to a school or pay the university. But what Mr. Bernie is, talking about, I think is everybody have to look out.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Pedro. So it sounds like education is a big issue for you. Wolf, I'm going to give you a show and tell around the room.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. We're broadcasting live from downtown Brooklyn, USA, where we say Bernie fucking crushed Nevada with super producer Matt Leck.
Bernie's going to win.
It's Chief Economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
Bernie's going to win.
Bernie's going to win.
How big is Bernie going to win Texas?
Dude, Bernie's going to win big. Did you see that rally? 13,000 people in Austin.
I also saw that my second choice, the great Marianne Williamson, endorsed Bernie.
I loved it.
We now have orb power. We're back. We were on a break, folks, but we're back and stronger than ever. Gave you a great new Adolph Reed interview. Check it out if you haven't yet. On this week's program, Benjamin Dixon joins us. We're talking about the unique threat to democracy and all we hold dear from mini Mike Bloomberg, why a Trump-Bloomberg race and more importantly, Bloomberg's efforts to stop democracy and steal the Democratic convention would be the formalization of plutocracy and ending democracy in the United States. We're also talking, I had no idea, maybe I should have given Joe Biden more credit, no idea that he was arrested as part of the struggle in South Africa.
Oh, yeah, come on, man.
I was with Becky, and that's when the negotiation, come on, man.
I was the only lifeguard in the project.
I was the only lifeguard in Soweto. We're talking about that, and then the great Richard Wolff. We're going over core concepts in Marxism and a whole lot more, including on the postgame, the debunk, the bad. And is Elizabeth Warren's campaign now an elaborate multi-level marketing scheme? You got to become a patron to find out. Gem. It's all here. We're back. Michael Brooks Show. But first, let's talk about Bernie's massive, incredible, stunning, beautiful, democracy-affirming landslide win in Nevada, where he crushed the corporate and oligarch and hack competition. Here's Bernie's team, a little bit of celebration that they put out.
So, Senator Sanders, you're going to run for president.
I am going to run for president. That's correct.
It's going to be different this time.
We're going to win.
We have begun the political revolution, and now we're going to complete it.
NBC News projects Bernie Sanders, the winner in Nevada.
I think there is a realistic shot that he could win the Democratic nomination. Do not underestimate Bernie Sanders.
You can tell how good I feel by how nervous the establishment is getting.
Senator Bernie Sanders held the largest campaign rally of the presidential primary season so far.
Senator Bernie Sanders has a clear and growing national lead.
The reason that we won tonight is because of the hard work of so many volunteers.
We need a social movement. I think Bernie Sanders understands that more than any other candidate.
You know what? They should be getting nervous. Let's win the Democratic nomination. Let's defeat Donald Trump and let us transform America and create a government that works for all, not just the few.
All right. And therefore, I just wanted to say that to, if you haven't yet, get out there, contribute if you can, volunteer, knock on doors, text for Bernie, make calls for Bernie. That's how this is going to happen in the summer. And of course, defeating Donald Trump in November. In order to do this, and what we saw in Nevada was a major defeat for the politics of a delusion. And let's talk about the three delusions that they've tried to hit Bernie Sanders with. And we'll be talking, of course, about Cuba later and the various other nonsense and garbage and embarrassing takes that the Bloomberg campaign and others will attempt to launch at Sanders and the movement. But we saw right before Nevada the three delusions: Russia, bros, and Medicare for all. Let's start with Russia. Russia is a topic that many people know that I haven't spent a great deal of time on, and I maintain the position that if you want to get to the bigger problem about election interference and undermining democracy, you have to deal with Mike Bloomberg, you have to deal with plutocracy, you have to deal with oligarchy, you have to deal with how social media platforms and public propaganda can be manipulated by anyone. And if you want to talk about the international dimension, you have to address U.S. foreign interference as well. This is not to deny that there aren't Russian foreign policy aims. That would be naive to do. But the bigger takeaway, and where folks like Greenwald are right, is that this is primarily a rhetorical strategy, a narrative strategy. Russia's now deployed from the establishment against anyone that might upset that very establishment. So anytime there is, as an example, a surging candidacy for decency, democracy, and justice in this country, as represented by Bernie Sanders, all of a sudden we hear speculations and mutterings around Russia. Never mind the fact, by the way, that even just strategically, why would a petrostate like Russia want the candidate with by far the most aggressive green and ecology plan? That doesn't make a great deal of sense. This came out, though, of a broader failure of the Democratic establishment, corporate America, and Hillary Clinton to accept why they lost in 2016. And this is irrelevant to Russia's role in the campaign. Let's be very clear about this. We don't have to deny that there might have been some links between Trump and Russia that may have been illegal, that may have been inappropriate. We don't have to deny that there weren't Russian bots or whatever. If you think that that is why Hillary Clinton blew that election and Donald Trump is president, you're denying the entirety of American history, as well as the unique and fundamental crisis that we find ourselves in now, produced over the last several decades. It's a head in the ground, xenophobic and delusional strategy. And folks who've criticized Russiagate have always been fundamentally right about the narrative problem. This is Bernie Sanders responding quite accurately and with a lot of swag to the Russia story before the Nevada vote.
Thanks very much.
How do you think it came out now? If you had the briefing a month ago.
Well, I'll let you guess about one day before the Nevada caucus. Why do you think it came out? No. Was the Washington Post? Good friends.
Swag. That's definitely Biggie Bernie right there. Washington narrative became the Russian narrative became an easy way to avoid reflection on the state of the country and actually addressing the crises we're in. Now it's being used against the Bernie Sanders movement by hacks who claim that the most popular Democratic campaign is not authentic, but the work of Russia. Russia. Then, of course, we have the Bernie Bros. And this is the same tired, exhausted narrative. Actually, people were reminding us that this was used against Barack Obama during Hillary Clinton's xenophobic pre-Trumpian campaign against him designed by Mark Penn in 2008 Democratic primary. This is obscene and stupid on a number of levels. One, of course, it literally erases the fact that by far Bernie Sanders' campaign is the most multiracial, most multi-base. He won, I believe, as of now, 70% of the Latino vote in Nevada. So you're immediately stating a lie and getting rid of the vast bulk of what's driving the Bernie Sanders campaign and vote. And that makes sense because it's a working class campaign, which is represented by everybody. That makes a lot of sense if you take 10 seconds to think about it. The other point here is that bros are good. Bernie bros are good. It's awesome that there are young bros or whatever that want people to have health care, that are willing to aggressively advocate for their candidate. Toxic online behavior. It's funny for me as someone who talks a lot about the vampire castle and all sorts of other things that I think are extremely unhealthy online, sometimes specifically manifesting on the left. If you want to have a conversation about that, let's do it. You want to have a conversation about how capitalist models of social media platforms incentivize toxic behavior. I'm all for it. But this is not a product of one campaign, period. Anybody who could look at some of the stuff that you see from the K-Hive as an example, I think.
It's what happens when democracy meets the internet.
It's what happens when democracy and capitalism and a highly modified technology that incentivizes certain behavior sets, meets the internet. So we can have that real conversation. It is stunning and mind-blowing and offensive and sickening and delusional and embarrassing that people who will defend Joe Biden's crime bill, who will ask you to listen to Mike Bloomberg's road to Damascus at exactly the moment he's running for president, apologies for running apartheid-style policies on young men of color in New York City, that they can fixate on people critiquing them online. There's a whole rhetoric, which I'm done with, as everybody knows. Rhetoric about privilege and fragility and all this stuff. I don't think it's useful for selling a bigger case. But wow. To actually be out in the public sphere, apologizing and advocating for violent policies, whether it means depriving people of health care, violently policing certain communities. And of course, not a second to be thought about what the U.S. footprint across the globe is, but to be whining incessantly because somebody might know something that you don't on Twitter, or you get made fun of for doing an embarrassing tantrum like Chris Matthews. This is insane. The Bernie Bro narrative is, of course, cynical and dishonest and ridiculous, but it is a product of such mental, emotional decline and such barbaric entitlement of the American elite that it actually does become something too important to talk about. Because if you're leveling that charge, you are almost certainly revealing yourself as being in an utter state of delusion, decline, and rot. And as I always say at the end of this talk, Bernie Bros, of course, ridiculous term to describe the largest coalition in American politics, but also, thanks, bros. Keep tweeting, bros. Medicare for all. The establishment-linked leadership of the Culinary Union attempted to fearmonger about the idea of every single American having full, high-quality health insurance. Well, you know who rejected that fearmongering? The actual rank-and-file members of the union membership, because they care about not only themselves having good health care, but their friends, their family, and their neighbors. They're driven by justice and decency. And oh, whoa, shock of all shocks, their actual concern about the material well-being of their fellow workers and citizens also overrode the Bernie Bros who tweeted mean things at the Culinary Union. If you shared that press release from the Culinary Union, unironically, I can't even put into words how embarrassed you should be. The rank and file cared about actual things. That's why they came out and caucused for Bernie Sanders. We all know that unions no longer having to spend their time negotiating health care means that they can fight for higher wages. Here's the good news. As much as the elites and centrists are stuck in the politics of delusion, working class America is not. The decision of culinary workers in Nevada to go against their union leadership and come out overwhelmingly for Sanders shows that. The politics of delusion is losing its grip, and its proponents are lashing out at the realization that they aren't in control anymore. People want health care, livable wages, an end to kids in cages, and a systemic fight against the global ecological crisis. The politics of delusion fundamentally come from a place of fear. The politics of not me, us is about courage, and it's winning. All right, folks. And speaking of which, let's get to the shout out. This is really funny because this is fun. This shout out will start with the opposite of a shout out. This is CNN's Chris Jensen. Oh, yes. Shout out, shout out, shout out.
My brain is still in recovery mode.
Shout out, shout out.
It's been a while since people heard Dave.
My brain is still in recovery mode.
Shout out.
From taking in so many high-level important ideas. Shout out. From taking in so many high-level important ideas.
No, actually, I have a question about this.
The dial of ideas.
I like talking about ideas.
High-level
ideas.
The exchange of ideas.
Shout out.
High-level. Still in recovery mode.
Looking forward to sharing more ideas.
Does Mike Bloom? Where does Dave Rubin go in an era where Mike Bloomberg is spending this amount of money on campaigns? Is something to think about.
Actually, I haven't really kept up with Dave, but I wonder what he is saying about Bloomberg.
I don't know. I have no idea. I just think it's an interesting idea to explore. CNN's Chris Jansen. All I could say is she's reporting from Nevada, where Bernie Sanders is crushing it with this incredible coalition powered by workers. And, especially if you're an on-the-ground reporter, obviously, if you're a talking head on one of these channels, you can say whatever kind of defamatory nonsense you want. But reporters are at least still supposed to pretend. Here's Chris Jansen not being able to pretend.
Largely people of color. Of those, the majority are Latino, and they are clearly, at least from eyeballing it, strongly in favor of Bernie Sanders, with Joe Biden coming in second. Brian?
Can you play that one more time?
It's unbelievable. Like, your job is to sort of, I'll play it in a second, but your job is to know what sort of English you're putting onto your English, I guess is what you're trying to say.
Indeed.
Here it is.
Bernie Sanders
Listen to one above. Let's just one more time. It's delicious.
Largely people of color. Of those, the majority are Latino, and they are clearly, at least from eyeballing it, strongly in favor of Bernie Sanders, with Joe Biden coming in second. Brian?
Now back to Chris and James Carville having complete emotional mental breakdowns. This is part of the Bernie Sanders team in Nevada, including Congressman Chuy Garcia, who just endorsed him. Chuck Rocha is not there, but of course Chuck deserves a huge amount of credit for this win. And we want to shout them out for the incredible organizing in Nevada. This Sun Belt strategy, mobilizing the Hispanic community, is going to be indispensable for winning in November. And if Tom Steyer and Mike Bloomberg were anything other than dangerous jokes and embarrassments, they would stop this nonsense of running for president and dump tens of millions of dollars into registering voters across the country, and particularly in Arizona, and be backing civil rights and voting rights lawyers across the country if they were serious for a second about beating Donald Trump.
They are not.
Which they are not. Here is the Bernie Sanders team celebrating in a way that recognizes Chris Jansen's contribution.
Bernie!
One more time. Let's go make South Carolina 4 for 4. Let's give MSNBC and CNN more heart palpitations. Fox News might be amused right now, but we're coming for you next because we're going to beat Donald Trump. So if you can, get involved in the campaign now. Let's make this happen. Don't let Bloomberg steal it. Don't let the Democratic hacks steal it. Don't let Elizabeth Warren try to steal it. Any of them.
The bandwagon's open, folks. You can join a winning team during the playoffs.
Absolutely. And we welcome all with open arms. As Cornel West says, I love conversions. All right. We're going to do a little pitch, and then we're going to get to Benjamin Dixon. All right, folks. Our goal, which actually could happen extremely quickly if a lot of you who watch this go over and do this now, is to get to 6,000 patrons. That's going to be our operating base of our own space, of expanding some of the things we do, including on the illicit histories, and potentially some other kind of regular offerings from TMBS. It's also the base upon which you already get 2 extra shows a week as patrons, in addition to supporting. The amount of work that goes into the main public show is at least $5-6 a month if you can. This is a huge amount of work in terms of designing the show, outlining it, guest curation, and all the rest. And then, of course, on Sundays, you get your illicit histories. You get in-depth interviews like the one we just did on Sunday with Aaron Bastani. And then Paul O'Connell was brilliant the week before that, but also histories on Thomas Sankara, on Brazil, on Jamaica, forthcoming ones on what did James Carville and other Democratic political consultants do in Bolivia, as an example. Ain't nobody want to hear about that shit. Nobody want to hear about Gonis de la Sada. Nobody want to hear about that shit. So, folks, you need to become a patron, and it is incredibly important. All of these independent shows are clearly massively important, with most media and corporate media operating as super PACs, not only against Bernie Sanders, but really against any kind of serious social and economic progress in this country. So there's other projects that come along. People, want folks to team up, and those types of things might emerge. But as of now, you have to support different projects and efforts individually. So if you can afford it, do it.
It's pretty amazing, just on that note, how much money Michael Bloomberg has had to invest in, $6,000 per propagandist to create whatever he's trying to create. And a whole bunch of lefty media producers like Ben Dixon with like 100 or so patrons are like, they basically have to replicate that. And it's how much money do you need to actually compete with left-wing grassroots media? It's amazing.
It's amazing. And then on this show, we're giving you also a comprehensive global political education, and keeping it fun in the post game. So it's about being, look, I won't lie, we are durable as for how we do things right now. We've been really successful. We've grown. But the clear goals in the hindsight are our own space, and also expanding some of the kind of longer form and documentary style offerings. And then again, just spreading it out and keeping what we do sustainable and growing. And in any single scenario, this type of work is elemental to the effort. There's no way around it. You're not going to get it from anywhere else. And you need to back it if you can. Patreon.com/TMBS, Patreon.com/TMBS. April 3rd, we're going to be at the North Door in Austin, Texas, with Anna Kasparian and Abby Martin. It's going to be an amazing live show. Half of our tickets are sold out. So I know usually when we hit that trajectory, we sell out. We've been selling out at the door. The Bell House actually did end up selling out. Philly was sold out a couple of weeks before. So if you're thinking about coming to that show, now's definitely the time to pull the trigger. Tomorrow, you're going to get an email, patrons, because we're doing a live show in Boston. You're going to get an info on that. You should go to tmbs.fm and buy gear and swag, and also get information. The cover's ready. The edits are ready. We're going to have in the next couple of days a launch date for my book for Zero Books, called Against the Web, the Cosmopolitan Socialist Answer to the New Right. I'm super excited about that. And you can read the blurbs on the site from Bill Fletcher Jr., Crystal Ball, Anna Kasparian, Marissa Baradaran, and Glenn Greenwald. All right, two more quick things to pitch. Promise I'll do less usually. This Sunday with Daniel Denver and Brianna Joy Gray, we're doing a live podcast in Boston, and then we're going to go canvass for Bernie Sanders. There's a certain campaign that we need to bench in Massachusetts so they don't try to deter democracy in the summer. And we're going to go to that senator's home turf, and we're going to win that state for Bernie Sanders. Come watch us podcast, and then let's all go knock on some doors for Bernie. On March 3rd, Super Tuesday, we're going to have our show. TMBS is going to be next Friday. And then I'm going to be in LA with Nomiki Konst, Nando Vila, Alona Minkowski, Justin Jackson, I think. There's going to be an incredible lineup of people here. And I know I'm missing some names. And we're going to do live coverage in LA of Super Tuesday. We're going to watch Bernie win California and Texas and Massachusetts, and we're all going to celebrate. And, probably do a lot of Chris Matthews impressions. So check all those things out. And first and foremost, go now. Become a patron at patreon.com/TMBS. If you are a patron and you're having a financial difficulty, get in touch with us. Don't quit. Get in touch. We'll give you a deal. Appreciate all of you. We'll be right back with Benjamin Dixon on The Michael Brooks Show.
You worked for a company that was fixing bread prices.
I believe that the president has learned.
Seems that there's a much more negative view of fascism than communism.
Propaganda, manipulating liberal politics.
52% of American millennials would like to live in a socialist or communist America.
Why, you're getting nervous, man.
I've done some dumb things, and I'll do dumb things again.
Shame me once, shame on me. Or shame me once, shame on you. Shame me twice, shame on me.
Threats are never gone. Right? It's always a lot of danger in the world.
I mean, it's amazing when you look at history.
$10,000 bucks? $10,000 bet?
Infrastructure, no bumps in the road. It needs to be simple. Keep it simple. Stop it. Knock it off. It is very, very disturbing when I hear the millionaire or billionaire word. And I told them, stop it. Knock it off.
This is beanbag. This is not beanbag. This is beanbag.
You have a wonderful day, bro, and I'll see you again soon.
Everyone knows that, and it almost wouldn't even have to be said.
That's a fucking good point.
I think this is an intellectual curiosity expedition.
Me warn you, and let me warn the nation against the smooth evasion that says, of course we believe these things. We believe in social security. We believe in work for the unemployed. We believe in saving homes. Cross our hearts and hope to die. We believe in all these things. But we do not like the way the present administration is doing them. Just turn them over to us. We will do all of them. We will do more of them.
important of all, the doing of them will not cost anybody anything.
Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is the great Benjamin Dixon. It's been too long. He's the host of the Benjamin Dixon Show. He's also the editor and founder of the Progressive Army. Benjamin, are you there?
I'm here, sir. How are you?
It's so good to have you on, Benjamin. And first, I just want to salute you because, look, I think a lot of us in the space, you know, I think we do a lot of really important work in different ways. And you did something that, let's face it, news organizations with tens of millions of dollar budgets didn't do, which is pull out a horrifying piece of sound of Mike Bloomberg talking about his stop and frisk legacy. So I won't obviously, we're not the CIA or the NSA. Don't tell us how you got it, but tell us about it.
Listen, man, look, I got it by doing the most basic research. I mean, the way I put it is that it dropped in my lap. It was sitting there ready for someone to find. And I think the problem was nobody was vetting Bloomberg in any meaningful fashion, not on mainstream media, right? Because if they had, they would have found that before me. And so I think the only thing that I happened to do was to beat everybody to the punch. That was pretty much it.
The sound is still pretty, I don't know. There's just a lot of static. I think we could power through it, though. I mean,
I could do a quick switch if you need me to.
You know what, guys, audience, bear with us. This is how the magic happens. Give us 1 minute, and we're going to do a switch because it's just a lot of static, and I want people to hear you. All right, we'll be right back. Don't you appreciate that great DJ Danarchy sonic journey we're on, everybody? And I also just want to say, because I had so much that I had to plug, and I apologize, but tomorrow at 3 o'clock, this is terrestrial radio, our great friend and mentor, Milton Alamati, has honored me by inviting me on his WBAI radio program. We'll be talking about the BRICS, Brazil, the non-aligned movement, and my interview with President Lula. I'm really excited. Everybody knows that I love Milton and honored to go on his show. But let's get back to it. Honored again to reintroduce the mega talented, the very important, the Bloomberg exposing Benjamin Dixon.
I'll take that one. Mike, if I'm not remembered for anything else, I am totally cool with peaking at putting a dent in Michael Bloomberg's campaign. Like, I'm cool. Like, if I don't do anything else, we did that, and we haven't stopped him. There's a lot more work to do, but we certainly did not allow him to go to the Nevada debate without having to answer for all the things that he had to answer for.
Well, I think in your first section, we won't redo it because people, folks did hear. Mm-hmm. Yes, a lot of this is out there just for people to kind of actually engage in and look at. And we're talking on a whole terrain of issues. I mean, just as he can micro-program a propaganda campaign on every channel because of his wealth, we can hit him back on everything from racism to, frankly, I'm totally comfortable. If he wants to talk about guns, you know what? I'm frankly comfortable saying, you know what? Yes, we're moderate on guns. You're an extremist who terrorized people of color and got nothing done.
Right.
And we have a campaign of common sense proposals that actually might appeal to a broad swath of the country. Regardless of that, or maybe in addition to that, do you think when you look at, I want you to talk about just how unique a threat Bloomberg is. And I want to contextualize it, not by getting into this, very boring, old, tired, like, will you support the Democratic nominee or not? And because that to me is a very boring conversation, to be honest.
Right.
And I have slightly, my view on that is a bit different than it was in 2016. But regardless, Mike Bloomberg is something different. Yeah. In my opinion. And I'll get to that in a second. But first of all, do you agree with that when we talk about Bloomberg, we start getting into a completely different set of questions about really the nature of where our democracy's at?
No, absolutely, man. I'm late to the party. I sat on the sidelines as long as I could in this race before I even endorsed Bernie from my platform, as small as it is, because I wanted to make sure that we had the unity that we needed to defeat Donald Trump, because I felt like Donald Trump was a unique threat. Enter in Michael Bloomberg. I feel like Michael Bloomberg is a greater threat to democracy, small d democracy, than Donald Trump. And I think Donald Trump is an imminent threat. I feel like we have to do whatever we have to do, politically speaking, to get him out of office. But I feel like a billionaire stepping down from his throne, right, to come and seize democracy from us in order to make sure that he doesn't have to spend $3.56 billion every year in a wealth tax. And that's just for Elizabeth Warren. So imagine what he's going to be spending with Bernie Sanders, right? That's the context that I think everyone has to look at this in. This has nothing. Michael Bloomberg is not trying to stop Donald Trump. Michael Bloomberg is trying to avoid paying about $14 billion in taxes over the first term of either Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. So I think he's a unique threat because he's shown that there's so much propaganda that has been drenching the minds of people who consume mainstream media that they are willing to accept one racist Republican oligarch over the next. And I think that is a unique problem to our democracy. So long story short, in 2016, I would be like, in 2020, I wanted to be like, listen, I want Bernie Sanders, but if Amy Klobuchar gets it, I would still vote, blah, 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 blah. But I'm not voting blue no matter who with the Republican oligarch. There's just no way in the world.
And because we can't, I guess what I'm saying, because we can't, like Matt Karp said on my show recently, that even as much as, and I'm not at that point, particularly in New York, I'm very clear that, I frankly wouldn't vote for any of them besides Bernie, frankly.
Right.
But this is not a moral statement. Understanding the difference on a material level of even the worst Democrat, a Hillary Clinton, a Joe Biden, a Klobuchar, a Buttigieg, and recognizing, though, that these are still individuals that represent the corporate oligarchic wing of a complex political project versus the unmitigated oligarchy itself.
Exactly, man. Like, this guy has stepped down. The ruling elite, the ninth wealthiest person in this country, he has stepped down from his pantheon of billionaires, right? And graced us with his presence in order to preserve himself, because he doesn't believe that the corporate wing of the Democratic Party is capable of stopping what the masses, what the unwashed masses are demanding. And so he's saying, I'll do it myself. Like, he really saw himself as some type of omnipotent being who can just come down and seize this with his money, with his pocket change, man. That's the thing that gets me about this dude, is he's doing all this with his pocket change. He's not going to miss any of this money that he's spending. He is the essence. Now, he's not quintessential. He is the very essence of everything that we fight against as progressives and ostensibly as Democrats. But what's being exposed is that the last 40-year experiment with neoliberalism and trickle-down economic theory that has drenched the Democratic Party is actually far deeper than we ever imagined, because they're willing to turn this thing over to someone who's going to do just on economic policy. He's going to be exactly what Donald Trump is, if not worse. And so it just tells me that it shows that the Democratic Party is corrupt to its core in terms of economic policy. And if they nominate this guy, even if it's a seizure, like, they can, if this guy manages to win by sheer virtue of his money, then that should be the very end of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, that means we're done. And as a final part, or we're not done, but I would say we're really done with electoral politics. That's when the whole terrain of these conversations actually have to shift in a real way to what does it look like when you're organizing outside of that electoral vehicle.
Yeah.
I want to spend a little bit of time on Biden and the cable tantrum, but before we do that, there's the other threads I want you to hit on with Bloomberg that strike me as really important are that there's two trends with him that, again, are really, I think, put things into really stark, very stark. So Bhaskar Sunkara wrote a column for the New York Times a couple years ago, which was great, where he basically said, and he said, look, these are like mind spaces. They're not literal, but let's say you have Finland Station, which is Lenin going into the Soviet Union for the Soviet Revolution, and set everything else aside about the Soviet Union, blah, blah, blah. The goal of that in 1917 and what he was doing in that moment was the idea that you're going to have a greater democracy across every part of Russian society, political and economic. And then you have Singapore. Singapore world is... it's not democratic. It's very autocratic. And you know what? On the other hand, it does value efficiency. It has a respect for a certain type of multiculturalism, because capitalism, as much as people, I think sometimes, frankly, we overestimate how wedded it is to white supremacist projects. It is, but it's also wedded to, look, if I'm doing global capitalism, I need the best person in that slot to some degree. There is some truth to that. And you see that in a place like Singapore. It's very multicultural in terms of we're all doing business and we're all producing things. And we're, if the best engineer is from Nigeria and the best, PR person is from, wherever, that's how it needs to be. Again, please, before I get all the tweets and comments, I know that there's still an enormous amount of problems in that system, but it is a different from the third area that Bhaskar pointed out, which is Hungary Station, as an exemplifying the resurgence of the barbarous neo-fascist right, Donald Trump, Orban, Bolsonaro. And a lot of us have said that basically the Democratic Party is on some version of that kind of Singapore world, which is basically, let's have unequal, barbarous capitalism, but let's have a little bit of diversity at the top. If the only two choices in the world are between diversity at the top or apartheid capitalism, we pick diversity at the top. People like us are still fighting for a world where there's actually justice and dignity for all as a possibility. Bloomberg, it seems to me, is the formalization, even down to him praising the Chinese model, of him actually talking about drug sentencing laws in Singapore, just like Trump has. Combine that with stop and frisk, not just as something in his background that he wants to disavow, but actually as a model. This is how it will look in polite society in the 21st century. It's not going to be Trump saying a whole bunch of shit. It's going to be like, well, that makes the most sense. And incidentally, we've got the Barack Obama internship program for the handful of people that we're going to diversify our company with. That's what it is, and that model is going to be nationalized with Bloomberg.
Yeah, I think so. A lot of people talk about the racism in the clip that we found. That's not what bothers me the most. And, maybe it should, but I'm just desensitized to it. I cover racist shit every single day. But what bothered me the most was his governing philosophy, right? His governing philosophy of he sees a problem that he disapproves of. And what does Michael Bloomberg do? He takes an authoritarian style approach to it, sends in the troops to suppress a problem instead of using the power of the government to address the underlying conditions that lead to the problem. Right. So there's so many studies that I don't even have to start citing them because they're so numerous, showing a direct connection between poverty and crime and violence. So if you want to address crime and violence, the way to do that is to address poverty. But does Michael Bloomberg do that? No. What he does is he sends in the stormtroopers to shut it down and to crush all of the dissent. Same thing with the sugar tax there in New York, right? We have the video where he says that the way we're going to regulate the behavior of poor people, because we want them to live well, right, is to tax them so that we can have use the force of government in a punitive fashion to correct a problem that's not addressing the underlying condition. It's just a punishment for being poor instead of addressing the poverty, right? And so we have instance after instance, and again with guns, right? A lot of people applaud him for what he's doing with guns, but I hate to actually say that's some authoritarian shit right there, right?
Yes.
And so he has an authoritarian vein in him that he justifies. It's well thought out. It's methodical. This is his deeply held worldview. This is not an anomaly for him. This is who he is. And that did not change just because he wanted to become president. And so he started apologizing. He just started apologizing so he could become president. But who he really is an authoritarian billionaire oligarch. The very worst of everything that we can imagine would come through his administration, because watch this. Who's going to check him? Who's going to tell him that we can't even control this one billionaire, was he worth $2 billion, Donald Trump? We can't
on his vision board.
On his vision board, right? We can't control him. But now talk about a person who's the 9th richest person in America. Who is going to hold him accountable when he's buying the silence of so many people? Never mind the people he's buying endorsements from, and he's just outright hiring people and pouring money into their charitable organizations. But now he's able to buy silence. So my question is if you really believe in Michael Bloomberg, you really have to pause and ask yourself, who's going to hold him accountable when he begins to do what he has shown us he believes is the thing to do based on his governing philosophy, which is really authoritarian. I'm sorry.
And again, that loops back to the other point of how much of it with these people in the center and in the elite is it just, they don't like Trump's manners. And that's it. That's it.
Oh, no, absolutely. We've seen that on so many policies, right? They still voted for the military expansion. They still voted for Republicans, particularly voted for his tax cuts. They love the tax cuts, right? And so this is what I try to remind people all the time is that, Mayor Bloomberg, he can win. He could buy his way to the presidency, but he also wins if he loses to Donald Trump, right? So long as he stops Bernie Sanders, he wins, right? So his only problem I don't even think he has a problem with Donald Trump, right? Because the oafishness has become kind of a sideshow. It's become something that they can laugh about at cocktail parties, right? Have you seen what the president did lately, right? So I think he's not even offended by the behavior of Donald Trump. I don't think he's offended by Donald Trump. He loves the tax breaks that he just got from Donald Trump. He is not in this to beat Donald Trump. He's in this to beat Bernie Sanders particularly, and I think Elizabeth Warren secondarily.
The last thing I'll say on this, and I hope everybody will kind of do this as a social media thing at least. Mike Bloomberg first and foremost, but also Tom Steyer for that matter. If they care about beating Donald Trump, the only thing they can do, and the only thing that I will not criticize them for, is put tens of millions of dollars into registering voters, particularly Hispanic voters in Arizona, which is going to be indispensable to winning a general election, and funding to the most lavish degree possible every type of voting rights attorney across this country, pay off people's fines that they have to pay in another utter absurdity in Florida to restore felons their voting rights. This is a way that you can both, God forbid, constructively influence American society and beat Trump. And if you don't do that,
then you're not serious about beating Trump.
That's it.
They're not serious about being Trump. I think the one good thing is I think I saw a report that the fines and fees that former prisoners have to pay in Florida, I think a judge recently ruled over the weekend, if I'm not mistaken, that they do not have to pay those fines.
Okay, great.
I'm going off of memory, but you're right. That should be, if they're serious about stopping Trump, they would put their money there. Right? Not in a failed. But I mean, again, $14 billion is what he's going to pay. I don't think this is the conversation that we have to frame for everybody. If Bernie Sanders wins or Elizabeth Warren wins, he's going to pay $14 billion in taxes over 4 years. So what do you think his real motivation is? Do you think he really gives a shit about Donald Trump, or do you think he cares about that $14 billion? Because he wouldn't be a businessman if he didn't care about that $14 billion. And so I think part of the narrative has to be to convince enough Democratic voters that he is what he is. He is a Republican oligarch trying to save his tax dollars. And that's all he wants. And catch this, he can get that even if he loses to Donald Trump. So for a lot of people who believe he's in this to beat Donald Trump, we got to really show them that he wins. Michael Bloomberg wins even if Donald Trump wins.
Absolutely. And don't be a mark. Don't be a sucker. This is a billionaire who wants to buy your party and cut Social Security. Like, come on.
Yeah.
I mean,
like
seriously.
He just believed that 3 years ago. Like, how do you really believe a person who believes that we should cut Social Security, cut Medicare, and make people who pay who get Medicaid pay higher copays all the way up to the age of 76 all of a sudden saw the light, and he doesn't believe that anymore? Come on. He believes that. And when he gets in power, he is going to take the Democratic Party and solidify it with the Republican Party.
That's it. All right. So there was also incredible meltdowns and tantrums and insanity on cable news. We're going to play this again because I love doing Chris Matthews impressions. But let's just do these two choice Chris Matthews. This is Chris Matthews. Let's do the France thing and then what he apologized about. I just want to say, because I don't care about being fair or whatever, but I do think being clear is important. He was not literally comparing Bernie Sanders to Nazis. He was saying it was like honestly, I think almost more just like a kind of like oaf pseudo-intellectual trying to sound like cultured. At the same time, it's hysterical and embarrassing in any scenario. And here is Chris Matthews.
I'm reading last night about the fall of France in the summer of 1940, and the general, Renault, calls up Churchill and says, it's over. And Churchill said, how can it be? You got the greatest army in Europe. How can it be over? He said, it's over. So I had that suppressed feeling. I can't be as wild as Carville, but he is damn smart. I think he's damn right on this.
Carville looks like he's having a fucking stroke. All right, here's Chris Matthews. I love and again, this is what power begets, because as much as they hate Bernie Sanders, they hate what he represents. It's personal, it's ideological, it's self-interest. You win, and you get this.
To tonight's news, I want to say something quite important and personal. As I watched the one-sided results of Saturday's Democratic caucus in Nevada, I reached for an historical analogy and used a bad one. I was wrong to refer to an event from the last days, or actually the first days of World War II. Senator Sanders, I'm sorry for comparing anything from that tragic era in which so many suffered, especially the Jewish people, to an electoral result in which you were the well-deserved winner. This is going to be a hard-fought, heated campaign of ideas. In the days and weeks and months ahead, I will strive to do a better job myself of elevating the political discussion. Congratulations, by the way, to you, Senator Sanders, and to your supporters on a tremendous win down in Nevada.
Yeah, but not only Jews, but also gypsies and homos. # woke. All right, Ben, your thoughts.
Chris, I think there's something happens in between the camera and the lights, and you honestly think that people can't see the bullshit, right? And you think that people can't see, like, Chris was so furious in his apology just now that he could barely hide the rage on his face because he had to apologize. Now, I'm going to go with you on this one, right? I don't care to try to be overly fair to people who are never fair to us. I think, again, that exactly like you said, he tried to sound like he was intelligent, like he was cultured, and walked into a landmine. Like, the last thing that you want to do is compare any Jewish person to Hitler, like to Nazis. That's just the dumbest thing.
Bernie Sanders like Bogart in Casablanca. The whole thing's getting shut down.
You know, there's a lot of ways he could have made that point. But I think to the broader point of what you're getting to is, like, there has been so much mainstream media meltdown around Bernie Sanders that it is hilarious. And it's almost jarring to see them now make a hard shift to bringing on more Bernie Sanders voices, right? That's one of the reasons, I guess, now in hindsight, I saw the article that got posted right after I went on Ari Melber tonight saying that they're looking for more Bernie voices to balance it out. So it's kind of shocking. I'm like, I didn't expect them to actually tote fair with Bernie Sanders, because what network has, right? CNN certainly has not, right? So a lot of people in the establishment, I think now they're adjusting so that they can find a way to protect themselves in the Bernie Sanders administration.
I think that's true. But I think the interesting thing that emerges, and this is, again, where, you know, this is just Bernie. I would never include Warren in this, you know, with all due respect. We all know with Trump that, for the same reasons that everybody's always known who was paying attention, that Trump is totally can be accommodated in this media ecosystem. And it was accommodated from the beginning. He'll go, I can't believe what he said at that rally. All right, let's go to it live and play it for 3 hours, right? We all know that. And okay, he won, so we think he's in bad taste and he's uncouth and blah, 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 blah. But let's hire some guy who used to I don't know, like run a pyramid scheme, and now he's like the deputy outreach for Klansmen for Trump or whatever. Let's have him as like a new analyst on CNN. We can deal with that. We can figure that out. With Sanders, I think there's going to be a limit, because on one hand, they're embarrassed. They have egg on their face. It shows how bad they are at their jobs. But on the other hand, and this again is where, you know, my friends who can get kind of, I think, you know, a little bit, Bernie's not even really that left. Well, you know who thinks he is that left are the capital class in this country, who are terrified of, what is, of course, a modest common sense program. So I think what we're going to see now is a balance between, they need to pivot, but this isn't like Trump. This isn't like, we can figure out how to work around people's manners or whatever, as long as we're still doing the same shit. Bernie represents something different. And it's a conflict with the corporations, frankly, that own these companies. Yeah. They're only going to let me own so many times, talking about the working class, talking about oligarchs, talking about all that kind of stuff. I don't think that they have the stomach or the bandwidth to allow actual leftism to thrive on the mainstream media. But we'll just call a spade for a spade. We'll take it for what it is. We'll say as much as we can, get on as often as we can to push that narrative. And as soon as they ask us to betray what we believe, then, you know, I've survived on independent media this far. I'll be quite fine. Exactly. Yeah. And it is going to be important, and it is going to be really funny to watch. And, you know, frankly, look, I want to hold the balance. I keep quoting it. The panel I just did with Dr. West, he said, I love conversions. I am completely with it. I reject cancel culture. I'm all about it. If you want to get on board, awesome. I'm with you. And at the same time, I would be very conscious of folks in the cable news ecosystem who have been for years demonizing this particular candidate, as well as the broader issue sets that he represents, and by extension, the tens of millions of people's lives impacted, all of a sudden, you know, getting hip to a new brand proposition. So I think we got to play with that dialectic. Before you go, Benjamin, we're going to South Carolina. I still actually think that, you know, funnily enough, I think Joe Biden still actually is the most formidable candidate against Bernie Sanders when it's all said and done, which is interesting. I could be wrong. I think that he is the only one who seems to have some residual and organic connection to some kind of broader base of the Democratic Party. I think, of course, he's chasing Obama's clout. We know all the reasons for it. But at the same time, I think it is there. It's not, you know, we've got Bloomberg's just going to buy everything. And then I think, frankly, none of these other candidates play really substantive. You know, they have a base, which is in the white upper middle class. That's what the numbers show with the other candidates, so far. And I don't anticipate that changing. And part of the reason that Joe Biden might have a strong showing in South Carolina, and I should just say the first half of that analysis was serious. Now I'm going to become decidedly not serious, is because of doing things like, and I hope we have the sound ready. This is Joe Biden abroad, if you know what I'm saying.
I'm terrified of
Joe
hearing
Biden,
this.
as you know, Benjamin, has a very long and illustrative history in the American civil rights movement. But this work did not stop inside our own borders, my friend.
What did you do, Michael? What did you do?
This work. No, I actually didn't do this part. This is something he actually said. This is Joe Biden talking about his record in South Africa.
Okay.
All right.
This day, 30 years ago, Nelson Mandela walked out of prison and entered into discussions about apartheid. I had the great honor of meeting him. I had the great honor of being arrested with our UN ambassador on the streets of Soweto trying to get to see him on Robbins Island. This day...
Did you catch that?
Did
you catch that?
Wow.
Did you just 1 minute? Did you catch? He just
it went by
said-
so fast. But did he? No. Can you rewind
play it for Benjamin one more time?
This day, 30 years ago, Nelson Mandela walked out of prison and entered into discussions about apartheid. I had the great honor of meeting him. I had the great honor of being arrested with our UN ambassador on the streets of Soweto trying to get to see him on Robbins Island. This day,
so
30 years.
Something that's easily trackable and something that's easily verifiable. Wow.
So
you sure
Matt,
you sure that's not you, Mike?
Matt was
That's not your person?
Matt, our fact checker. Was Joe Biden arrested in Soweto trying to see Nelson Mandela?
It appears if he was, he didn't mention it in his biographies when he talks about going there or ever really before. We have a New York Times story about it right here. I'll pull it up.
Well, just to be fair, just because he didn't say it in his biographies, and we all know that Joe is extremely reticent about talking about
trafficking.
He's a very modest guy.
but here's oh man, here's what's wild about this is that every politician embellishes. Everyone makes some kind of origin story, right? They give themselves and they lie around the edges, right? It's marginal.
Yeah.
But when you lie about getting arrested in the apartheid movement with the Secretary General or whoever he was with, like that's some easily verifiable shit. Like, come on, man, what is going on with this dude?
I'll just read a little bit from the New York Times here. It says, but if Mr. Biden, then a United States senator from Delaware, was in fact arrested while trying to visit Mr. Mandela, he did not mention it in his 2007 memoir when writing about his 1970s trip to South Africa, and he has not spoken of it prominently on the 2020 campaign trail.
I was the only lifeguard in Soweto.
Andrew Young, a former congressman and mayor of Atlanta who was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations from 1977 to 1979, said that he had traveled with Mr. Biden over the years, including to South Africa, but Mr. Young said that he had never been arrested in South Africa and expressed skepticism that members of Congress would have faced arrest there.
I mean, that's the thing. I like how it's like everybody, you have to do the reporting like they said arrest records are not readily available, which is true. And then he didn't mention it in his autobiography, but I could tell you where we would probably find something like this happening, which would be in every single modern history book written about South Africa. If they arrested a United States senator in the 1970s, but this would be slightly registered on the world stage.
Let's just read a few more quotes then, because it's kind of funny. No, I was never arrested. And I don't think he was either, Mr. Young, now 87, said in a telephone interview.
Bothering Andrew Young at his home.
Wait, is he talking about Andrew Young?
Yeah, Andrew Young was the UN ambassador.
Andrew Young, the one who just endorsed Bloomberg, no less. So now it's like insult to injury. Now he's not only saying that you're lying, Joe, but I'm also endorsing Mayor Bloomberg.
Well, I'm pro Biden in this one.
Yeah, well, we can move on to this. Here's a former Senator Gary Hart, a Democrat from Colorado who joined the Senate in 1975 and who was a vocal opponent of apartheid, said in a brief phone call, "I know nothing about that."
All right, well, Benjamin Dixon, on that note, can you tell us in the last minute, well, first of all, would you like to thank Senator Biden for his efforts, and how do you think South Carolina is going to look?
I really appreciate everything that he did to end apartheid in South Africa, and things would not have been the same without him, so we appreciate your service.
I was the guy who said you need to negotiate with Mbeki. I was there.
On behalf of Corn Pop, and on behalf of all the people of South Africa, we genuinely appreciate you. In terms of South Carolina, I think Joe Biden is going to do fine, obviously, because he's riding on the coattails of a black man. A lot of older black people just want to get back to some semblance of normalcy, so they're trying to be quote unquote pragmatic. But I don't think his win is going to be big enough to actually keep him alive in the long run. I think Mayor Bloomberg is going to be throwing some interference on Super Tuesday. If Mayor Bloomberg was not in the race, I think South Carolina and then Super Tuesday would revitalize Joe Biden. But with Bloomberg in there, thankfully, kind of sort of, he's in there enough to continuously water down all of the moderates. But we have to find a way to kick all of them out once and for all. And I wouldn't be surprised if the establishment goes ahead and does what they should have did in the beginning, which was to rally behind Elizabeth Warren. But this is the last thing I'll say. The establishment is extreme, right?
Right.
Bernie Sanders is not radical.
Right.
Elizabeth Warren is pretty much standard fare Democratic with maybe one or two policies that seem pretty progressive, and it's cool, fine. But even Elizabeth Warren is too much for our extreme Democratic corporate shill party. And so this is really where the rubber is meeting the road. The people are saying, screw you to the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party is doing everything they can to fight back. So I think we have to be ready to fight back. We need to be organized in case they try some shenanigans in Milwaukee. We need to be organized beforehand as well as after the fact.
It's kind of like P.T. Botha and Nelson Mandela. That's what Bernie Sanders is like. Benjamin Dixon, thank you so much as always. Really appreciate you. Please, everybody, go check out Benjamin's Patreon page and every other thing that you could find and support his excellent work, including the exposure.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thanks so much for having me.
Of always. Thank you, man. Take care.
Peace.
All right, folks. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a very brief break. We have a gem to get to, but Dr. Richard Wolff is going to sit in and judge. We're back to old times. He's going to grade David Griscom in real time. Grading Griscom. It's called Grading Griscom tonight. It's not the Griscom Economic Update. It's Grading Griscom. But we're going to take a brief break, and then we'll be right back on The Michael Brooks Show. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. It's a great honor and pleasure as always to introduce Dr. Richard Wolff. He's our friend. He's a host of Economic Update, Democracy at Work, supported at Patreon. He's also author of this fantastic new book, Understanding Socialism, which you should order. And maybe, frankly, this is one I would, if you have the means, maybe order for some, friends and family. They can have some understanding of this word. But before we do anything else, you ready to sit in judgment of David Griscom? Wait, is Dr. Wolff up? Uh-oh. David, are you sabotaging Dr. Wolff's mic? You want to piss him off?
Well, I heard he was coming at me.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, Dr. Wolff, you ready to sit in judgment of David Griscom?
Now that the Weinstein case is over in New York.
Jesus
Whoa.
Christ.
Whoa. I did not want to escalate the joke like that. Oh, speaking of which, I guess we should. I just saw that before we got on air. Weinstein. Goodbye. I only noticed, by the way, when he was walking out of the courtroom that all of a sudden his walker apparently wasn't needed anymore.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Fucking
F
pig.
this. I just throw it.
Yeah. Fine. All right, David, what do we have?
Yeah, so there's a really interesting report in the New York Times.
No music. Let's just do
We're just gonna give a stab.
Actually, could you do the we should do the music we did for Elizabeth Warren later.
Oh God. Yeah. So this is just something that's been going on over the past couple of months that we definitely need to be paying more attention to. A lot of times when we're talking about like political economy of the United States, one of the big stories that people are interested in is like all this movement with these tech companies like Uber and Lyft, Airbnb, etc. Well, over the past couple of months, there's been a real shift in the prospects of those corporations, especially new tech startups. So companies like Wayfair, 23andMe, and others have been letting significant amounts of their employees go over the past couple of months. So the New York Times reported that over 30 tech startups have cut over 8,000 jobs in just the past 4 months. I know Wayfair, they let around 500 people go on Valentine's Day. These are for the most part, these companies, especially some of these ones like Wayfair, which are trying to take up the space. They were trying to be like the Amazon of furniture sales. So they end up having.
They help fund. They help get furniture to ICE detention centers.
Oh yeah. I mean, like these, there's a significant amount of people employed by these organizations. So these kind of cuts, are very worrying for obviously a lot of people, especially people in Boston where, Wayfair was a big employer. But this has been coming also in the light of a slowdown in investment for these tech startups. So you're starting to see people who have, been, growing a lot over the past couple of years. They're starting to now come down with cuts to their employees, but then also with, reductions in how they're paying people, reductions to people's benefits. So you're seeing this like part of the U.S. economy, which for so long has been, this vibrant part of, the American economy. It's like the tech driven growth, which, first of all, did not touch that many people. Tech's very good at sort of keeping profits going to a few folks, and not something that is really trickling down to the average person. But even in those organizations, we're actually starting to see like a very significant tightening. So you look at what happened with SoftBank, which is like primarily when you're talking about organizations like Uber and specifically with WeWork, their $100 billion vision fund has been pushing a lot of these corporations that had no path to profitability. It was very clear that I'm sure everyone knows by now about how ridiculous the WeWork's entire business model was and how fanciful it was fundamentally. And this is something that's just been propped up by this massive investment organization. So you're seeing all this movement and all this kind of tech is something that has like so much overconfidence, especially like Silicon Valley organizations. And you've been seeing these narratives like, oh, we are in the future now, everything's changing. And now we're starting to see, as people start to get a little bit more worried about the future, that all of these investments are starting to tighten up, and this belief that we've entered into this new kind of economy is starting to dwindle. So SoftBank's lost $2 billion just in the last quarter of 2019. So you're going to see a lot of these tech companies that people have been, highlighting as like the great hope of the American economy. They're going to start tightening. and let's not forget too, corporations like Airbnb and Uber and a lot of these corporations, they're not really like fundamentally changing the economy. They're just finding ways to put the losses on other people. Right. Airbnb does that by making property owners, take the damages that go into their apartments over wear and tear. Uber, people are driving miles and miles and miles on those cars, so those cars depreciate in value. And instead of Uber owning those cars, now it's just their drivers who are owning those cars. So that's really what this innovation has been ways to offload the cost of doing business onto average people, and has been, finding ways to just suck up lots of investment money. And if we start to see that investment money, dry up, we'll be seeing a lot of problems. And I just wanted to hit this because when we're talking about the Uberization of the American economy, it's important that we don't get caught up in these kind of fanciful narratives where we're forgetting what the actual reality is that the reason that workers in this country are so devastated and that wages haven't gone up is because of a power dynamic. It's not because of technology in and of itself. And if we get into this trap of thinking that technology is what is creating the fundamental problem for American workers, then we'll get into solutions like, for example, the Andrew Yang campaign that don't want to go to the heart of the problem, which is the fact that capitalists have so much power in our society and the working class has been beaten down. And we need to empower workers, and that's how we're going to get into a better situation for everybody. That's how we're going to be able to beat back this really horrendous system that we've been seeing.
So, Professor Wolff, I thought it was a strong performance. I've been feeling increasingly bullish on the Griscom segments. So first, your grade, and secondly, can you actually connect all with the less shtick part? I mean, what does this phase of the economy we're in tell us about the limits of where capitalism even has to grow in its own terms?
Well, I think the report is very, very good. All I would do is add a little bit more to it. And that's not a criticism because you can't do everything. You have a limited amount of time. And focusing in on the investment pace, if you like, in this business and how it puts at risk tens of thousands of workers is a good place to focus. So what I would like to do is give it a little bit more context within the broader capitalist system. And it starts with the fact that we now have a capitalism that has gone really to an extraordinary extreme of inequality. We've literally erased everything that was done to compress the distribution, to make us less unequal, that was started in the 1930s and continued into the 1940s, the New Deal and all of that. We have now basically undone that. If you look at the distribution of wealth and income, we're back to the 19th century. We've eradicated whatever the 20th century in the middle was able to do. And that has enormous consequences. It's not just a moral question that a few people are very rich and an awful lot of people are squeezed. I mean, that's an important moral issue, and everything is justified about bringing it up. But I want to talk a little bit about the consequences and show how it connects to your point. When the mass of people are squeezed, they can't, if their wages are stagnant, which we know they have been, real wages, they can't buy a growing quantity of goods and services, especially after 30 years of loading up on debts they can't increase the way they once could when it was new to be in debt on this scale. We have the mortgage debt, we have the automobile debt, we have the credit card debt, and we have now the student debt. It's an incredible overload of indebtedness. So to make a long story short, the mass of people cannot buy an increasing output of goods and services. And what that does is it presents the small group who have all the wealth, it prevents them from making any kind of profit, from producing more for the mass of people. It's not there. They're not going to be able to justify it or to do it, or if they proceed anyway, they're not going to make any money because they can't offload the stuff they could have invested in building more of. So they become desperate for where to put the money. And they become very vulnerable to what? To an age-old capitalist game, the bubble. Somebody comes along and says, oh, I know you're squeezed, you haven't got here's where it is. whatever it is. It was the dot-com bubble, then it was the real estate bubble. If you go back, there's the automobile bubble and the electricity bubble and the modern chemistry bubble. I mean, it never stops. And so now you have just the latest incarnation, the high-tech bubble. We're going to use the computer to revolutionize every aspect of life, making a fortune. And people are, remember, the folks who have a lot of money, they're not there because they're smart. I mean, they would like us to think it, but they're not. An afternoon with Michael Bloomberg, you'll get it. An afternoon with Donald Trump, you'll get it again. I went to school with people who, all of those people, or their children, and there's nothing, I mean, that story is ridiculous. So they're very vulnerable. And they're looking for some way to make money. One of the reasons you've seen the run-up in the stock market is that's a bubble. That's a place to go where the money can quickly make more money because they're not producing anything. They're simply buying and selling from each other in a game in which everybody wants to make more money. Everyone's desperate. So playing the stock market is like playing high tech. And that the story always ends the same way. You keep doing it, you keep doing it, and then one day it begins to show that in this company or in that sector, it's not paying off. You're not and then the anxiety, then the reverse goes in, and everybody's freaked out that they've invested everything in WeWork as the latest hotshot, and there's nothing there.
Does it strike you?
Anxiety, and then as everybody pulls out, of course, the cards fall because it's the flip side of the up bubble. It's the burst bubble, and you're beginning to see now, and the danger of these numbers, like the 8,000 that got jobs, is not in that. That's a tragedy for those people and the families and communities. Again, an important issue. But the real risk is when does the trigger happen that those numbers begin to be circulated and all the other people who've poured their investments into this hustle begin to withdraw. If you take a look at today's stock market, if literally there you see the panic begin to go nuts. Now, it's claimed it's a panic about the virus.
Corona.
I doubt that it's just that. It's always many things. But one of them is the lurking anxiety. We're in a bubble, and I don't want to be the one caught when it bursts.
Is there a relevance to, there's the historical process you've just described, and it happens in every type and phase of capitalism. However, if you're starting a company at the beginning of, the automobile boom, or you're going to go overseas and exploit oil or natural resources, or for that matter, today, okay? Or you're going to say, all right, we're about to have a giant middle class in the United States, and people are going to wash dishwashers, so we're going to make them, and we're going to have, So yes, there's bubbles, and yes, it's not durable because of the broader problems of capitalism. But those things do make a lot of sense on a very intuitive level, which is, okay, millions of people are going to want to buy a dishwasher or a car. When we start getting to the phase where SoftBank is putting an enormous amount of capital into a company that you can really dig into, I mean, honestly, you can really go into it. And it's like, well, we have a common meeting space, and people go and they bring their laptops, and we have coffee for them. Now, even within that, you could spin look, you own New York and San Francisco real estate. That's capital. And in fact, in the way the economy works today, there are people who want to buy, membership. I mean, Soho House on completely the opposite end, actually, they're definitely, I would doubt they're a publicly traded company. That works. They're very profitable. They provide a hugely swanky upscale experience for people who want that. Okay, that's a real business. But when you start, but WeWork, the comedy of it is that there's no part that you can ever look at where anybody could have actually thought to themselves that this would in any way ever bring billions of dollars back on returns. But ever. So what does that say about the phase of capitalist exhaustion now that we're not even at the gadget phase? We're at this isn't really a meeting space company, man. It's something else. I'll take a $5 billion equity on it.
I think it's the same model all the time. In other words, for these bubbles to start, there has to be something real. There has to be some story in which Joe Blow or Mary Smith came up with something, maybe a new technology, maybe a new business. Usually it's less the technology and less a new business than it is a rerun of the old hustle. And I'll give you an example with Uber in a minute about that. But they start with something that makes money. You have to have that so you have something to point to. Then every hustler and his brother and sister arrive and say, see what Jeff Bezos did with Amazon? I can do that with furniture, or I can do that with, dental floss for your dog. It doesn't really matter. It's
now you're just making fun of podcast advertising.
And basically, if you look at their advertising, it's get in on the ground floor of X because you could have in the Y. Everybody knows what happened with Y, so they want to be, especially when there's nothing else to play with. This becomes the attraction. What I said before, I would even want. Well, anyway, let me finish that story. So that's what every bubble is. You can point to a beginning. You can point to a set of investments that did real well because of something. We'll look at it in a minute what the something was. Maybe a new technology, maybe a new product, probably a new rerun of an old hustle, as with Uber. But whatever it was, it made a lot of money, and that brings in the hustle. That's why the parallels are so similar, whether it's tulips, in the 18th century, the tulip mania, it started with tulips being a very attractive flower that no one had ever seen before, and you could grow these bulbs, and it didn't cost much, and people would pay a fortune to have this beautiful, colorful flower. In other words, it started, and then everybody and his brother came in and told you how much money you could make. And if you have concentrated wealth, it doesn't take that many dumb people to be hustled for you to get the bubble, and then it just builds on itself. Let me give you an example of Uber, because it has nothing to do with technology, basically. It has nothing to do with a new business either. It's an old business. I'm going to exaggerate, but to make the point. All Uber is the attempt to get around the social arrangements for taxis. When the taxi business starts, which is a century ago, before even there were automobiles, you had basically the taxi idea was with horse and carriage too. The idea was very simple. Use one set of vehicles to transport lots of people. So the vehicle doesn't sit in the garage 24 hours a day waiting for you to take a ride, because that's really inefficient. It's like the difference between a single-family home and an apartment building. It's much more efficient to live in an apartment building. All right. So what happens right away is that capitalists get involved. They want to make money off of the taxi business, whoever developed it. And so what do? They try to jack up the price, and they try to cut corners on the cost. And the end result is you have accidents because they didn't maintain the carriage. You have accidents because they didn't maintain the horse, or they didn't maintain the car, or they scrimped on the insurance, and you get injury, pain, loss. And after a certain point, it becomes too dangerous to use the cab, and yet people need the cab. And so the resolution, private capitalism is a bust. That's what happens. And you call in the government, which is what always happens, to fix it. In comes the government and works out a deal, which they're supposed to. They have a taxi and limousine commission, as here in New York. Here's what it does. It says to the companies, okay, we can't have a taxi business where people take their life in their hands when they get in the cab. So you have to have insurance, and we're going to check you. You have to have maintenance, and we're going to check you. You have to vet the driver. You have to make sure she isn't a drunk and hasn't been in jail and doesn't, assault people and all the rest of it. And that's expensive. You have to do all these things. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to set rates to compensate you at a reasonable rate of profit for all the expenses, and then we'll have a functioning taxi system. We've taken care of the costs. We've made sure there's an incentive plus punishment if you don't maintain the cab, but shut up and do it, because we're going to give you 8% a year rate of return with the pricing of the cab. The cab ride becomes more expensive, but the public is comforted. The poor can't take cabs. They never could, except when their life is at stake or the baby's about to be born. It's a convenience for people with better means, but it works. We have a taxi industry. In comes Uber and says, whoa, if I can charge the same price that they've set up, but I don't pay the costs, I don't maintain the insurance, I don't maintain I can make a fortune because I'm riding off of what was accomplished to solve a problem by reintroducing the very problem that the commission was brought in to solve, which is what Uber did. That's why we have all the scandal about Uber not maintaining insurance, Uber not maintaining, or forcing their drivers to, in this case, or maintain the thing, or you get the picture. And when that isn't enough, when they're forced by public opinion, they start squeezing the drivers and cutting. I mean, it is ridiculous. It's a rerun of a bad old movie. And the end result will be, sooner or later, to bring Uber under the commission, just like everybody else. And then the whole distinction will dissolve because cab companies can have the same software to run the business as Uber or Lyft already do. And we've just watched the capitalist game rerun.
Well, there it is, folks. I mean, honestly, but that raises so many other interesting questions. And today, I was just confessing to you before we went on that I tried to watch your debate with Paul Krugman on Democracy Now! And I couldn't get through most of it because, frankly, it wasn't. I was actually I'm surprised to hear myself say this. I was expecting and hoping for more from Krugman, so it was interesting, other than just socialism is a controversial word, which seemed to be the kind of main thrust of the argument. But you were, and I want to set this clip up. I want to play this clip from the debate. You were setting up a couple of themes that we've talked about on this show and talked about with you specifically. One, the bigger one is the socialism word getting destigmatized. Another, which is actually, once it becomes destigmatized, becoming a much more sophisticated about how we talk about socialism and the different brands of socialism. And I want to talk in the post game about, because the new thing with to try to demonize Bernie is, common sense comments he's made about the success of the Cuban government, as an example. But the different schools of socialism. Is socialism about having a big empowered government that fights back and controls corporations? Yes, in certain traditions. Or is it about actually moving to a genuinely post-capitalist, post-governmental world? And what does that even look like from the perspective of labor, economics, and cooperative economics? Really, really interesting questions. And I thought what was striking, and immediately when I thought of in your debate with Krugman, Krugman was just there to basically say the socialism word has no political upside, and Bernie isn't even really a socialist. He's just a good progressive who I like. Maybe I'm kind of pretending to get acclimated to, and Denmark is lovely. And you said no, he is actually a socialist. He does represent a certain socialist tradition, and I'd like you to touch on that. But I thought that this really did actually come through at this moment in the debate, which maybe. Correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe I'm projecting too much of my ideology on this. This moment with Mike Bloomberg, he didn't just say, hey, Mike, it's wrong that you have this much when so many people are suffering. He did say that. But he said something about how Bloomberg got what he got that I don't think you're going to hear from pretty much any other candidate or anybody that doesn't at least have a somewhat socialistic understanding of how wealth is created. So all that being said, let's play that, and then I'd like you to respond to that and maybe reflect on it in light of your debate. And I guess turn up the speaker. All right.
Mayor Bloomberg, should you exist?
I can't speak for all billionaires. All I know is I've been very lucky, made a lot of money, and I'm giving it all away to make this country better. And a good chunk of it goes to the Democratic Party as well.
Is it too much? Have you earned too much money? Has it been an obscene amount of money? Should you have earned that much money?
Yes, I worked very hard for it, and I'm giving it away.
Thank you, Hallie.
What is the part, though, that still goes on, right? Okay, we need Bernie's response to this.
Just to be.
It is your policy.
Thank you. It is my policy, and I'm very proud of that policy. All right. What we need to.
they're either talking about the wealth tax or the corporate board stuff.
Right, and the corporate board stuff was significant. Yeah, all right.
To deal with this grotesque level of income and wealth inequality is make sure that those people who are working, you know what, Mr. Bloomberg, wasn't you who made all that money. Maybe your workers played some role in that as well.
But look at Bloomberg.
It's important that those workers are able to share the benefits. Also, when we have so many people who go to work every day and they feel not good about their jobs, they feel like cogs in a machine. I want workers to be able to sit on corporate boards as well so they can have some say over what happens to their lives.
And all Bloomberg had in response was, this will just help Donald Trump. But I just want to outline this really clearly because, okay, we have that this is immoral and grotesque. Absolutely. I think actually pretty much everybody who isn't, completely demented at this point would have buy-in on that. But then we have, how did the wealth actually get created? Maybe your workers have something to do with it. And then we had alienation. It wasn't just a policy about being on this corporate board. It was people feel terrible in these jobs. To me, that is actually a very clear expression of some type of democratic socialism coming through.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know where to start. There's so much. On Krugman, in case we come back to it.
Please.
He was extraordinarily nervous. I could not understand why. He seemed nervous before we went on before the camera, and he was nervous throughout. He was uncomfortable defending his position, and he was kind of weak at it. I've seen him in other circumstances where he's more aggressive and stronger. He either didn't expect what he got there, or he doesn't have this all worked out. To be fair to him, he's part of an entire generation. I am too. But he's part of the mainstream, and I'm not. And what that means is he decided as a young man in graduate school, learning to be an economist, and he and I went to the same basic schools, which is why he knows who I am and all the rest. He made a decision that most made, which is to stay as far away from Marxism and socialism as you could get. There's no percentage in it. Nobody wanted to hear it. But we're talking the Cold War here, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. It was not good for your career to show the slightest interest other than a dismissive, back-of-the-hand approach. So to be blunt, they don't know much about this subject. It's not because they aren't smart. They are smart. It's not because they don't have the capability. They do. But this was something not to get near, and so the result is what you get if you don't get near something. They don't really know. So he's able to say, big mistake right at the beginning, Bernie's not a real socialist, as if there is such a thing. I make a little fun of him. I say, where's the agency that gives certificates as to who's real and not? There's no government does that. No private.
Maybe we should do that on the show. Actually, that'd be interesting. You think we could do that? We could do a certification.
Give a certificate. People might really go for that.
All right.
I try to explain that from the beginning of socialism in the early part of the 19th century, people have disagreed about what socialism is. Among the socialists, they've always disagreed. They've always been. In the heat of argument, one calls the other not genuine, but we kind of understand it's a tradition with multiples. And in that tradition of multiple interpretations, Bernie Sanders occupies a very well-trodden path. That is one kind of socialism. You leave enterprise in the hands of private capitalists, but you regulate them and you tax them in order to soften the hard edges of capitalism, by which I mean extreme inequality, the instability of business cycles, all of that, and the government comes in and moderates all of that. That's a kind of socialism. Nobody has any right to deny that. Most of the Western European socialist countries with their socialist parties and socialist newspapers believe that. And that's enough evidence to say that's a kind of socialism. And nobody has any standing to judge this right or wrong, real or unreal. And it's less that he's polemic here. He just doesn't know. And you could see he became unclear because it's a pool in which he's never swum and he doesn't know where the eddies are, and he's smart enough to keep himself away from that. But you're going to see a lot of confusion around this by people who don't know. Chris Matthews on the MSNBC.
Would you like to play some Chris Matthews? Would you enjoy watching some Chris Matthews?
So he's got socialism and communism confused. Now, the distinction between those was established when the communist parties around the world were formed in the immediate aftermath of World War I, so roughly 100 years ago.
What led to that distinction?
It was all about the Soviet Union. Remember that the Soviet Revolution in 1917 was the first time that socialists had gone beyond being an opposition party, being a movement, being a radical organization, and had taken state power. What this did was gave the Russian socialists a level of prestige that isn't hard to understand. They did it. Nobody else had done it, at least not yet. And so, in a sense, I'm making it simple, but the global socialist movement split. Those who felt the Russians had found the way and they should be followed decided to demand that kind of loyalty to Russia and support be part of basic socialism. Other socialists didn't agree. They thought there were many things the Russians did that were good, but there were many things. Remember, this is the late teens, early 20s of the last century, that there were many things they already didn't like and didn't agree with. And so there was a split. And those who went with the Soviet Union changed their name. We're no longer socialists. We call ourselves communists, whereas the others didn't agree. And one of the key points, and the one that is durable for the next 100 years to our present, is that communists say, you socialists are self-deluded. You think the government can come in and manage this, but it can't. If you still have capitalist enterprises, the wealth is concentrated in their hands, and they're not stupid. They're not going to allow a government to function that threatens their situation, and they will go to work to undermine your regulation, to evade it, to weaken it, and eventually to repeal it. For example, Glass-Steagall. You have a regulation, you don't like it. For 30 years, you evade it. For the next 15 years, you weaken it. And with Bill Clinton's signature, you get rid of it. Right. And that this is the model and leads the communists to say the only way forward in this situation is for the government to take over the ownership and operation. To confuse Bernie, who's only the socialist of the first kind, who has never in his adult life, and I've known him for years, advocated the communist solution. It's not an adjustment these days. That's not who he is, not who he's ever been. That is either ignorance or just malevolent hostility, fear-mongering, because it doesn't recognize either the old socialist tradition or the communist breakaway.
But he is open in some ways, and I think a part of his legacy that to me is fascinating, because I actually think, talking in electoral terms, obviously there's going to be some older voters that you need to get that are scared of that word, Absolutely. And we have to deal with it. But to me, Bernie, as far as I understand, particularly when he's mayor of Burlington, and he does have this worker on the board idea, and I think that is not, it's certainly not revolutionary communism, obviously, but it's also not necessarily just sort of, a kind of regulate and tax redistribution. It's a model that I think is not as comprehensive as what you put forward, but I think it starts to tip in that direction of, well, okay, these enterprises are not existing as either private or public sovereigns. They have to become sort of democratized social entities. And so when he put forward, I remember last summer when he put forward that worker board plan, and I looked back at some of the things that he had promoted successfully as mayor of Burlington around housing ownership and land trusts and things like that. That shows me that he's very open to this thread, which not only to me is more radical and exciting from the perspective of my politics, I think ironically it's actually very electorally appealing, because you can talk to plenty of folks who might not feel comfortable with that terminology, but they sure as hell might know what a community bank is or a land trust or those types of things.
Let me give a response on that and a couple other things that are related. Bernie gets that idea from Germany, because Germany is the best example we have of both the political appeal and the economic realization one can have around workers on the board. Germany has for decades had a law which says any company that has 2,000 or more workers has to basically put just below 1/2 of the board of directors are elected by the workers. In German, it's called Mitbestimmung. And what that means is determination with. And Mitbestimmung means the workers are with the decision makers. They have a determining voice. Now, they're outvoted slightly. So, yes, the capitalists hold control. But they have to inform workers know about what the plans of a company are long before they do here in this country. They understand the strategic. They can be a control over the books. There's all kinds of real valuable power. Now, the socialists pushed that in Europe, in Germany. The socialists won it. But so successful was it, so popular, that the conservatives, in and out of power, leave it alone. They can't undo it because it would be an eruption. Look, the current leader in France, give you an idea, wants to take away the pensions that the socialists have fought for. And he has a general strike on his hand, and his popularity numbers, are half of those of Mr. Trump. So, I mean, he's a bit of a clown, but then again, clowns are now what we have.
Clowns are ubiquitous.
Number one. Number two, the advice of Mr. Krugman, Professor Krugman, or Dr. Krugman, or whatever. His advice was lose the socialism.
That's funny to me.
Right? Lose the socialist name.
Yes.
An advice all kinds of centrists are giving.
Yes.
Now, it strikes me you have to be extraordinarily dense to give that piece of advice when you're talking about Bernie Sanders. This is a fellow from Brooklyn, a classic left-wing leading young socialist who leaves Brooklyn and moves to Burlington, Vermont, from the major city to a very small city out in the middle of nowhere near the Canadian border. Okay. But he holds on to his social. He's a little socialist. And as a socialist, he becomes active and known in Burlington. He eventually gets on the city council as a socialist. He then runs for mayor as a socialist. Then he runs for Congress as a socialist. Then he runs for Senate as a socialist. And now he's the front runner for president. He did all of that with the socialist name. Why in the world would he get rid of it? It's his horse. It's how he got here. That's the advice of a person who doesn't understand anything that happened here, who lives in a world of polling, whereas Mr. Sanders is a real winner riding the horse of socialism in a state that has lots of older people, lots of people that were scared by the Cold War, lots of people with an individualist, rural, all the things that you're supposed to worry about will never be. They love Bernie up there.
Can we actually play? And I want to say it's even more impressive because he didn't. I believe he was not even on the city council. He went straight to mayor. He ran multiple statewide races, which he lost by massive margins by, and they saw a path to him becoming mayor, and he won as an independent, self-proclaimed socialist. By also, by the way, and people should take note, doing things that he's absolutely going to need to do, like, running against the developers and the gentrifiers, and also getting the patrolmen's union because the police were getting their wages messed around with. And that was very savvy of him. Can we find that moment in the debate? I don't know if it's handy, but it should be. It's all over the place, where Lester Holt asks Bernie about the socialism polling. Do you know what I'm talking about? This is exactly what Professor Wolff was talking about. While we find that, it was definitely in the last debate. It was Nevada debate, and Lester Holt asked him, "What do you think about basically the polls that show that 2/3 of Americans don't want to vote for socialists?" And check out how Bernie responds. It should be clipped. While you're looking for that, in the last couple of minutes on the main show, and we have a lot to do in the post game, including we've gotten some leaked audio where Elizabeth Warren's campaign is now becoming a multi-level marketing plan that we're going to be playing for people. But can you give us, we're going to do some sort of ABCs of socialism with you over the next, several times you're on. And starting now, can you give us a very basic introduction to the labor theory of value, which does track with what Bernie was hinting there in his exchange with Mini Mike?
Sure. No?
Yeah, no, go for it. Well, we're looking, but please tell us.
Okay. To do this properly, you have to remember what modern economics is all about. It begins basically in the 18th century. There's some efforts before, but not much before, in the 18th century. And that's a period of time when Europe, which is where this starts, is going through a transition from feudalism to capitalism. And think of it this way. It's a little stylized, but summary. In feudalism, the economy is organized around the feudal manor, usually a small piece of land, a village, or maybe a group of villages.
I sent it to you, Matt.
Yeah, which have a kind of a basic problem. We produce dairy, we have cows, we grow crops, we make pots and pans and clothing. And so we could all do it for ourselves, be self-sufficient, and many villages had that. The individual family did all of it for itself. Or you could have rudimentary division of labor, people concentrating. This one's a baker, that one's a candlestick maker, and all the rest. And then you have the problem, how do you distribute what these people are making, since each one is producing kind of for everybody, and you have to have an arrangement. And in feudalism, it might be organized by the priest, or it might be organized by the feudal lord. But in the transition to capitalism, there's a transition to have the distribution of a division of labor accomplished in a quid pro quo exchange. I make bread, I'm going to be willing to give you a loaf, but you got to give me the shirt you make, because I don't want to be cold and I don't make shirts, I make bread. And so we get into this market arrangement where we bargain how many breads for the shirt, how many oranges for the chair, etc. Well, once you have a market, you have a whole new problem for the human mind, which is, wow. Before, when I made everything myself here on the farm, I knew exactly how much labor, how much time I need to make my bread, how much time I need to sew my shirt, how much time I need to raise my pigs. But I don't know that anymore because I'm now focused on one thing. I'm a pig farmer, or I'm a shoemaker, or whatever it is. And so my life doesn't depend only on how hard I work, which it used to when I was making everything. Now I depend on this thing called the market. I can make shoes just as well this year as I did last year, but when I go to the market to exchange them, they may fetch me no tomatoes instead of a bushel, which they did last year. Not because of anything I did in my work, not because of any change in my output, but because of a change in the market. This comes as a thunderbolt of mystery in human life, because we now have to understand not what we knew before, which is how much work and how much sweat it takes for me to raise the cow and raise the pigs and build the shack and all the rest, which I understood when my father and mother had taught me, etc. Now I have a new mystery, the mystery of the market, which poses itself as this fundamental question. Why are the prices of the things I buy and the things I sell what they are? I need to get some control over my life to have a theory of prices. Why do markets, why is the cell phone worth this and the book that and my pair of shoes the other? The mystery of them, and that's what people set themselves to produce. And the language they used was what explains the value of things when we trade them in the market. Not some intrinsic value, what do you think about the thing? No, what does it get you when you come to market with X and you want Y? How's that work? What determines the ratio of X's for Y's? In the effort to understand that, theories were developed, a variety. If we had a lot of time, I'd take you through them. But I'm going to focus on the ones that became most important because they were invented, basically, by Adam Smith and David Ricardo, typically understood as the founders of modern economics. Both of them subscribed to, and this may shock some of your listeners, the labor theory of value. For those who think that Marx invented the labor theory of value, I have bad news. He didn't. Marx took the labor theory of value from Smith, who invented it, and from Ricardo, who modified it, And he modified it again. So it is correct that Marx had a labor theory of value, but it's a derivation, let's call it. It's an adjustment to what he learned from Smith and Ricardo. And he found it fascinating that they had linked the value of things in the market back to something more fundamental that caused that, namely, to use Adam Smith's language, the toil and trouble it takes to produce something. That has an important role to play in determining the value. How hard, how much work do you have to produce? So Marx did that. Adam Smith and Ricardo took the labor theory of value and used it to analyze capitalism as people who loved capitalism, who supported it, for whom they could enlighten the world about how wonderful capitalism was using the labor theory of value, which they did. Marx borrows from them, takes from them the labor theory of value, adjusts it, but what's important is he has a completely different goal and objective. He's using the labor theory of value to attack capitalism, to demonstrate why the human race can and should do better than capitalism. So yes, he borrows a tool, but no, it's not the same tool. But that shouldn't surprise anyone, because he was on a different trajectory. He had a different goal. His goal was the critique of capitalism and going further. Here's the irony that you may appreciate. Marx's interpretation, which is developed by him in the middle of the 19th century, toward the end of the 19th century, about 1870, it had become so widespread as the broad understanding that the labor theory of value got to be associated more with him than with its forms in Smith and Ricardo. And it made the people who thought about economics, still a small part of the population given literacy at that time and so on, it made them extremely nervous. And they said, my goodness, this labor theory of value, yeah, it was developed by Smith and Ricardo, and they love capitalism, but the guy who's running away with it is Marx, and he's using it as a battering ram against capitalism, in a way I'll show you in a couple of minutes. And so there was a reaction. And the reaction was, we've got to undercut Marx. The people who loved Smith and Ricardo, distraught at where Marx had kind of taken the labor theory of value, came to the conclusion, roughly at the same time in French, English, and German-speaking Europe, that the only way to defeat Marxism was to drop the labor theory of value. Even though they credited classical economics, Smith and Ricardo, for having developed it, they said, look, we love them, they are the founders, we share with them a love of capitalism, but you got to drop this labor theory of value because of what Marx has done with it. So they made their goal the development of an alternative theory of why prices are what they are in the market. The same old question. By the way, Marx did not go, that was not his question. He wasn't interested. I'm going to exaggerate. I mean, he did some work on the subject, but his main interest wasn't why prices go up. He was interested in how people relate to each other in society. He was a socialist. He wanted to change the relationships, not among things in a market, but among the people who buy and sell and work together. So he was interested in value theory because he wanted to look at how labor has to be reorganized to make a better society, which I'll get to. But the others didn't. They wanted to answer the question, why are prices what they are, without the labor theory of value. And what they did, the person in England who did it, Stanley Jevons, the person in French-speaking Europe, Léon Walras, as he's called, and in the German-speaking, Böhm-Bawerk, a hyphenated last name. And they all came up with what is now known as conventional mainstream economics, that value is determined by utility, right, not by labor. The thing is valuable not because of the labor taken to produce it, but by the usefulness people find in it. So this is a radical, Now we've got nothing to do with labor. We're not interested in the reorganization of labor. Labor now becomes something that is passive, that is organized by the technology in play, and there's nothing more to say about it. You have the necessary workers who the machine says you need, and almost as kind of a technological determinism.
So this isn't just, I just want to really underline this. This is not a technical innovation in a technical field. This is an ideological pivot in a political
100%.
field.
That's right. 100%. So why? And it isn't that complicated. The reason the labor theory of value was junked and why modern economics is all about utility theory, which is what is taught in every university, in the United States at least, but in many parts of the world as well. It's modern economics. Because it held on to Smith and Ricardo, it was classical, but because it dropped the labor theory of value, it was different, so it called itself neoclassical, which is the tradition of economics that we have now. But that's the truth of what happened here. Okay, so here's Marx's idea. When anything is produced, the producer, the capitalist in a capitalist system, buys a certain amount of inputs, machines, tools, raw materials, and they have whatever value they have. They cost him something. And when they get used up in production to produce something else, the value in them is transferred to the output made by using them up. But of course, let's use the example of a ladder. If you buy wood and glue and hammers and all the things you need to make a ladder, the value of the ladder at the end is greater than the value of the inputs that go in. And the difference is the value added by the laborer, the human being who uses the hammer and the nails to shape the wood into a ladder, thereby makes the ladder more valuable because of the labor added. To Marx, this is the labor theory of value. It took a bunch of labor to make the inputs. That the value or that labor gets transferred to the output. But to that is added in the production process the living labor, he calls it, the human being using his or her brains and muscle. And now Marx makes a simple observation on which everything else sits. He says when the worker works, this living laborer, he adds more value than he is paid for doing the work. The capitalist gets a difference. The difference being, I'm going to pay you X, but when you work, you're going to add more than X to what you produce. And the more than X, I will realize when I sell the output, because the way capitalism works is you come to work, you pour your brains and muscles into this product, but as the product is produced, you have no claim on it. Your claim is the wages I will pay you. What the value is that you've produced that I have the right to sell is none of your business. But the capitalist knows that his well-being is to create the biggest difference possible between the value added by the worker, which is given by the worker's effort, and the value paid to him, and that's a negotiated deal between employer and employee. And the reason that employers are always trying to cut what they give to workers one way or another is not about they're greedy or nasty or unfeeling people. It is the way the system works. If you're successful at it, you'll have a profit, and that will allow you to grow and survive. And if you're not successful at it, you will die because you'll be outcompeted by others who are. So you have to abuse your workers every chance you get. Take away their bathroom privileges, take away their parking facility, find a way to speed up their activity. Do everything you can to maximize the difference between the work they do, whose value is added to your output, and what you pay them. And that contradiction between the workers, who have no incentive to work harder because the fruits of that go to the other guy. Right. And he who has no reason to be compassionate with them because it interferes in his success to be compassionate. Oh, go to the toilet, take an extra 10 minutes. I mean, what? He can't do that. And that's not because he's mean or nasty. That's the way the system works. And the conclusion for Marx is don't yell at the worker and don't yell at the employer. These are people lost in a relationship that has to change. Only then is it reasonable to ask, to demand of them the moral behavior because otherwise you're asking them to be moral while the system in which they are surviving requires them to ignore your advice. And instead of being frustrated, understand capitalism is the problem.
That's a perfect way to transition to the postgame. I'm going to leave it on that note. That's perfect. We do have this sound we'll get to. We also have, again, is Elizabeth Warren's campaign becoming a multi-level marketing scheme? We're going to be talking about Fidel Castro a little bit, and a clip of him and President Mandela. Of course, Ben Burgess is going to join us for a debunk, and we've got a whole bunch. Follow Professor Wolff. Subscribe to Economic Update on iTunes. Subscribe to it on YouTube. Watch all the clips. Listen to all the podcasts. Go to Democracy at Work and become a patron member to support all of this enormously important work on what an actual democratized economy looks like. And buy this book. This book really does lay it out.
Buy it for someone on the fence.
Buy it for someone on the fence. Buy it for someone you don't like. Buy it for someone you do like.
Yeah, buy it for an anti-communist.
Yeah, buy it for an anti-communist. Buy it for someone who says, oh, freedom. Buy it for. Send a copy of this with a nice, honestly, I can't even recommend this because people are too. If you could send this to MSNBC with a very all the best, wish you well, Chuck Todd, Chris Matthews. No reason to be, don't frown so much. This is all we're talking about. It's like France and Munich. Yeah. All right, folks, and become a patron today. Our goals are very close on the horizon. You're part of it. We're excited about this. We appreciate all of you. Patreon.com/TMBS. Come see us live in Austin, April 3rd. Patrons tomorrow are going to get the inside track on our Boston live show. Come see me in LA March 3rd with Nomiki and the whole team covering Super Tuesday. This Sunday in Boston with Daniel Denver and Brianna Joy Gray podcasting for Bernie and then canvassing. And tomorrow on WBAI with the great Milton Alamati. See you guys in the postgame.